Hello, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Parker. Bonjour tout le monde. As Parker said, we're here today for, I'm just gonna close this off. We're here today for a panel, our first panel of the second day of the wonderful Chinatown Reimagine Forum, Evolutive Futures, Alternative Modes of Cultural and Economic Revitalization. To start off, I'd just like to acknowledge that Montreal's historical Chinatown is on traditional unceded territory of both Kanagahage and the Anishinaabe First Nations and people. Today is also September 30th, which has been designated as the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And this day honors the children who never returned home and survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. So as I was listening to yesterday's panels, and I hope as you listen to today's panels, it is a day of reflection on what reconciliation and decolonization can tangibly mean for us. I think, and how we can work towards reconciliation as a Chinatown community. So our panelists yesterday discussed some practices and reflections on how we build coalitions with Indigenous communities, as well as we talked a lot about those Indigenous communities throughout the housing panel. And so I would ask each of you today, as we go forward on these two panels and the rest of the day, to think about how we grow these relationships in both big and small ways. So as a community, but also what are the individual things that we can do. But to get started, so we have 5 panelists today for today's panel, which is one more than yesterday. So we're going to be a little bit tighter on time for folks. So they've been asked to share 6-minute stories on experiences or lessons learned from their cities and communities on how we can build up Chinatowns as sites of cultural development and ensure that small businesses can grow, adapt, and survive to serve the communities and beyond, to serve their local communities and beyond. So we're going to run this pretty much the same way as we did yesterday. Well, I guess they were run a couple different ways, but you know, I'm going to introduce one panelist, excuse me, they'll give their presentation, and then we'll move on going through all 5 panelists, and then we'll have this time for discussion. So before we start, I should introduce myself. My name is Leslie Cheung, and I am the president of the board of Montreal's Chinatown Roundtable, which is a new nonprofit here in Montreal, created to support and uplift the voices of all the different stakeholder groups in our Chinatown and work towards what I see as consensus for what is the future of this neighborhood. So we aim to work with various groups, from merchants to family associations to social service organizations to community groups like 9-Man Volleyball or a gardening group, as well as individual citizens and residents, including youth representation or youth in Chinatown or working or involved in Chinatown. So that's what we do. Okay, so just to start, I'll just gonna jump right into it. So our first speaker is going to be Mei Lum. So Mei Lum is a community activist dedicated to nurturing the art, culture, and history of Asian Americans in New York's Chinatown. She's the 5th generation owner of Wing on Woe and Company, so WOW, her family's porcelain business, and the founder of the director of the WOW Project.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for being here on a Saturday morning. As Leslie mentioned, my name is Mei. I'm the 5th generation owner of my family's porcelain shop here in the heart of Manhattan's Chinatown. We've been around for over a century, since 1890. And I'm also the founder and director of the WOW Project, which is a arts and anti-gentrification organization based out of my family's shop. And I will talk more about our work through the WOW Project, but I first wanted to start with the origins of the shop and my own reimaginings of the space and the expansive way that I'm trying to think about how a storefront can contribute to a neighborhood, because I think that this conversation that we're going to have together around the intersections of cultural and economic revitalization and cultural development is linked to us expanding our minds in how a storefront can be a site of politicization, storytelling, cultural production, and also political resistance. I started this journey in 2016 when my grandmother decided that she was going to retire from her role in my family, stewarding Wing on Wo for over 50 years. And I started to think about, in tandem with continuing to keep this place that my family calls home and as their family living room, to keep this place in the neighborhood and to think about the ways that letting go of the storefront space would impact my block, and my larger Chinatown community. And through these conversations with different community stakeholders, I think you heard from one of them yesterday, Jan Lee, as well as artists, activists, residents, small property owners, I heard a resounding desire for there to be a space for us to really look at and understand, to understand what these changes in our neighborhood were looking like, and what they really meant with the change of hands in these family-run businesses, and storefronts popping up that didn't necessarily look like they belonged in our neighborhood or look like the fabric of Chinatown. And so I just wanted to show some visuals of how we started to really look at interrogating this question or this idea of a storefront as more than just exchange for pure economic development. And we started with holding really open community dialogues around topics that felt really current and urgent to our community. One of them in collaboration with the Chinatown Art Brigade, which is a woman and queer-run collective that looks at the role of art in our neighborhood and also works with CAV, another housing justice organization. And we talked about the role of art galleries and the influx of them in our neighborhood. This is another example of how we activated the storefront through our artist residency program, which again was a direct response to art galleries and art and the lack of accessibility, accessibility to art in our neighborhood, and the art not really reflecting who we are and the rich cultural fabric that has already existed and continues to grow through the intergenerational connections that are here in Chinatown. And we continue to hold different cultural workshops also in the storefront space as part of our artist residency program. Something core to us thinking about the future, I think, when I looked at this panel and I was really honored to receive this invitation, I think something that I was thinking deeply about was this idea of succession and how succession shouldn't be thought of as in a family line, but more who are we passing down Chinatown to and who do we want Chinatown to be in the hands of? And through my work with the WOW Project, we're thinking really deeply about how we can put people at the table that haven't historically been or who historically haven't had seats at the table. As we all know, Chinatowns have a very strong patriarchal legacy and patriarchal roots. And for me, what has motivated me to do the work that I'm doing now are all the matriarchal figures, all the women in my family. And that was really key and core to me taking over, coming into this role and starting the WOW Project. So when we think about succession in relationship to our space, we're thinking about how we can create more opportunities for femme, queer, trans, and non-binary Asian American youth to really be at the helm of creating and shaping what the future of Chinatown looks like. And so this is an image of one of our Lunar New Year celebrations. We have a youth art and activism program that we house at WOW. And they built a really beautiful confetti paper lion head made out of discarded confetti from Lunar New Year. I don't have enough time to go into the program, but I just wanted to provide this example. and then also more pointedly and intentionally uplift this one project that I think is a really good example of the intersections of small business and art and culture strengthening each other. And this started in the winter of 2021 in the wake of COVID, and us really realizing that small businesses needed the WOW Project's help and needed our skills to feed back resources into these businesses that are, make up really the cultural fabric of our neighborhood. And we built off a neighborhood tradition of spending over $20 at different neighborhood businesses and receiving something in return. Often it's calendars or red envelopes. And we really wanted to create our own calendar to incentivize folks to patronize these businesses, but wanting the content in this calendar to also carry different stories, celebrate the businesses and their own stories of staying in the neighborhood. So I worked with a photographer that captured different vignettes of moments in Chinatown to their memory. Is that a croissant in your hand, Leslie? Okay. Just checking on my time. But yeah, this was a really beautiful project that married both arts and also economic revitalization and support for these businesses in Chinatown. This is another iteration of this project last year, and this project continues. I think what we're thinking about this year is how we can use this moment of Lunar New Year to expand the awareness about the mega jail deconstruction and construction in our neighborhood, and how we can support those businesses that are being directly impacted by the deconstruction of the current jail that is on Baxter Street, but also tell their stories and support them while also educating the community about what's happening and why this is urgent right now. So I think I threw myself off by worrying about time, but I want to make space for the other panelists. Thank you so much for having me. This is just a tidbit of the work that we're doing, but excited to be in conversation after we all share.
Thank you so much, Mei. Yeah, I wasn't actually even sure you could see me, so I didn't hold up the croissant, but I can do it now that I know folks can see me. But I will try and do it discreetly. Thank you so much. Really excited to keep hearing from you on this. So our next up is Alice Lam. Alice Lam is an avid volunteer and community leader in Calgary's Chinatown. In addition to creating fun events to bring more folks into Chinatown, she leverages her background in commercial real estate to help older Tong-owned buildings to fill their empty spaces. So she has her presentation up and she's ready to go. Thank you so much, Alice.
Hi, everyone. I will also try to go as fast as possible, but it's like 10 years of experience. So Calgary Chinatown, what have we been up to? So let me just test this. A little bit about me. I started really volunteering in Chinatown in 2016 when there was a residential condo development that was going to threaten the context and security and safety of the neighborhood for seniors. And that's how I got involved in the advocacy side. My parents are Chinese from Vietnam, so we speak Cantonese, and I'm a volunteer with I Love YYC Chinatown, a volunteer-run advocacy group. We host Chinatown tours, and I sit on the board of 2 buildings in Chinatown now, the Chinese National League building and the Cultural Center. And in my day job, I work in commercial real estate, so I lease spaces. And in this picture below here, you'll see that in 2016, I was just a volunteer, and in 2023, we are now working on our first commercial redevelopment of a historic building in Chinatown that is more of an upgrade and an enhancement than it is a destruction of an existing building. So this is just a little bit of my background work. I have a lot of experience in my day job. I own a couple businesses. I started Calgary's first Pay What You Want thrift store for a barrier-free shopping experience for people who are low income, close to like right beside Chinatown. And then I also plan lots of like night market type of events for artists in our city. So our Chinatown in numbers, we are a 9-block radius. Visibly, it's about 4 blocks. We have over 145 businesses, ranging from restaurants, retail to services, and of course, tongs. And then we've been around for over 100 years. So in 2015 and 16, it was all about survival. We had a development permit that was going to really gentrify the neighborhood, and it was really about upzoning than it was about true development. And so the community really wanted to say, hey, City of Calgary, we haven't been engaged in the process. It hasn't been transparent. And so, you know, hundreds of seniors went and rallied at the City of Calgary, spoke at a public hearing. Unfortunately, during that public hearing, they were shut down. Like, the council still voted to proceed with the development, but then we, as a community, appealed it and won. And now there is a new development permit in place, but since then, the relationships have gotten a little bit better. It was thousands of hours of advocacy. And what we realized was that the greater Calgary community really wasn't coming forward to support Chinatown when we were in the news during this time. Like, a lot of people just kind of took Chinatowns for granted, like, oh, it's just where I go to eat. There's other neighborhoods with Chinese restaurants in it. It doesn't really matter that much if it disappears. They also had this perception that it was kind of run down or empty or vacant. And so they were like, well, Chinatowns are disappearing all over North America anyways, so whatever. And so what we started doing was hosting Chinatown history tours for people to realize Chinatown wasn't a neighborhood that, you know, the City of Calgary designated for us. It was a community built by pioneers, Chinese pioneers who came to Canada to work on the railroad, to work in the gold mines, and they built this neighborhood despite opposition from the greater community who did not want Chinese people to have a building. So in 2017, we started to host historic Chinatown tours. We've done over 100 to date. I've hosted most of them with my friends, and we're all volunteers. And it's reached about 4,000 people. Some of our best moments and our most important moment was being able to take city administration and city council staff on a historic Chinatown tour, because for the first time they were able to see, oh, on the second level of this building above a restaurant is an entire community association full of seniors participating in arts, participating in culture and fundraising and helping each other and just having a place to hang out. And the sentiment among some of the urban planners were like, oh, we should have done this before we voted on the issue, right? So since then, the city has taken a more proactive role. A lot of the people I see in the chat or in the participants today, I met through volunteering in Calgary's Chinatown. So I'm excited to hear your comments about it as well. And what we discovered was really useful for us to build advocacy in the community from the greater community was through storytelling. So this picture is me with Ron Lee, who is a historian in our city and a former school teacher. And we work together to kind of help share their story out to a greater neighborhood and to make it more accessible. The City of Calgary also created something called Calgary's Chinatown Task Force, Tomorrow's Chinatown. And so things that they have done is create a Chinatown area redevelopment plan, Chinatown cultural plan, and also renamed one of the parks that was named after somebody who was vehemently against Chinese development. So during the pandemic, as you know, many Chinatowns were at risk. A lot of businesses who were near retirement anyway shut down. New businesses that never had a chance to survive closed down. Many feared that this would be the end for Chinatown. However, there was a revival. So once we started getting involved with the tours, like throughout the pandemic, we still volunteered a lot. We took seniors on walks. We really did what we could to share the history of the neighborhood, both online and across social media. We still did tours, social distance, outdoors. And over time, we were able to build this community of artists and small business owners who are really interested in how can we be in Chinatown. So in the picture, the top left corner is Rachel Lee and Hannah from Boo Vintage. So in the Chinese National Building, I was contacted because they were like, we're going bankrupt. We don't know how to fill these spaces. They knew that I worked in real estate. They knew I spoke Chinese. And so they contacted and I said, you know, I have a friend who wants to open a vintage shop. Let's see how it is. And the twist that we do with all businesses that we bring into Chinatown is like they have to go on a Chinatown tour with us, because we think any group that comes and starts a business in our neighborhood, like we don't want them to gentrify it, which has happened to some Chinatowns in Canada. We really want them to understand where we're coming from, honor the folks who built this community, and really recognize that we are guests in this neighborhood. And so same thing, there was also a speakeasy that opened called Paper Lantern that also brought a whole new crowd of people during the pandemic. And it's really across Canada, revitalized Chinatown is like the cool place to kind of be and start a business. So here you can see some of the activities that we've done also since the pandemic to just bring people into Chinatown to have experience. We did a big outdoor hot pot meetup. Everybody brought their own hot pot equipment as like kind of like camping style, and we had like 50 people. We do outdoor movie nights. You can see here Shawn and Karen were in Calgary doing the screening of Big Fight in Little Chinatown. We hold mahjong, and these aren't things that we invented. These are things that we've been inspired by in other Chinatowns or other municipalities around the world, things that we've seen. And also bringing recreation and sport back into Chinatown. So we started a badminton club, free badminton in Calgary Chinatown, which has brought like lots of families as well on a weekly basis. So we're hoping that there's going to be a lot more that we can do in the future as we start to build up this advocacy and also try to get the greater community back in, like involved in any way that they deem they can. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of people don't want to get involved politically or in advocacy, and we're trying to show people that if you want things like Chinatown to last, you have to use your voice. And so yeah, that is my presentation. How am I for time? I don't know. Good.
Very good. Thank you so much. Just a reminder to speakers, I was guilty of this as well, but just to slow down a little bit for the translators. I know we have short time, but we want to make sure that our translators or interpreters can get everything you're saying because it's very interesting. So we're going to move on, and but I'm seeing lots of themes coming up, so very exciting. So our next is, hoping he's ready, Shawn Tse is based in Edmonton. He's a father, an artist, a filmmaker, and a community organizer. He primarily works in the arts and nonprofit sectors to co-create and social impact programming and showcase stories of community care. So I'm going to pass this over to Shawn. He also has a presentation.
All right, so my name is Shawn Tse. I'm an artist and community organizer based in the Miskouche-Waskahikan, known as Edmonton, Treaty 6 Territory, and Métis Homeland. I think it's very appropriate that, you know, for us to be doing Chinatown work to acknowledge that our Chinatowns are on stolen Indigenous land, and our country's cultural spaces continue to be at threat of colonial practice of terra nullius, Latin for nobody's land, and a philosophy that land is empty and unused, which our Canadian systems have justified to stealing Indigenous land and the genocide of Indigenous peoples. It is the same philosophy that gentrifies and displaces racialized and poor communities. And so, you know, I don't know how we can really do this work in an equitable way without really facing those truths and, you know, seeing how we can do this work in more of an intersectional and more of a solidarity towards our Indigenous and folks of color that are facing many of the same things. All right, so I'd like to share the story of Chinatown Greetings, an artist-driven community project and fundraiser centering Edmonton's Chinatown. It's an important to preface that Chinatown Greetings is rooted in and would not be possible without the support of many beautiful community relationships, collaborations, and cultural knowledge that were generously passed to us. So in 2021, like many here who were concerned about the impacts of COVID-19 on Chinatown, co-organizers, artists, Emily Chu and I developed our concept for Chinatown Greetings. In Edmonton, cultural organizations and businesses shut down. Approximately 30% of businesses didn't return. So as we got back more into in-person activity, we wanted to harness the power of art to show appreciation and support for Chinatown. Our urgent aim was to bring more foot traffic back into the community we loved, and as a longer term goal, also spark more relationship building and collaborations. So yeah, my presentation is really about the two projects that we've done that try to answer or aim for those goals. So Emily, pictured here on the side of me here, is just has been such a key part of this. She's a veteran in producing merchandise, marketing, and organizing pop-up markets, and just an amazing illustrator and artist. And with our collective experiences in arts and community organizing, we proposed this fundraising project to our community and our networks and received, just amazing support for, wanting to help Chinatown. And, that came in forms of outreach, sponsorship from a local organization, Chinatown Transformation Collaborative, and also even like giveaways from local artists that were just wanting to, you know, um, commit to this idea that there's ways that we could really like channel folks back into Chinatown, but also like support them with dollars to keep the businesses open. Um, so we worked with and commissioned a local designer, Ray Dak Lam, who made these beautiful posters that you can see. And he created, and out of the poster, we ended up creating a collection of art goods. Um, we had 100 illustrated banners that were actually handed out to storefronts. And that was also a way to get people to go to the shops, to look for them, and support the businesses, share the stories on social media, and yeah, share stories of why those shops are so important to them, and how we should be all talking about keeping these cultural spaces alive. We sold merchandise online and had contests to generate excitement and buzz in social media, as people are trying to get back into in-person. And we held pop-up markets to bring the community together. So yeah, these are some kind of pictures and things that we shared on social media. In an effort to be also very transparent about what we were doing, and really just want to potentially inspire other folks to do the same thing. We really wanted to be equitable in the way that we were doing things. We really wanted to ensure that the artists were paid and everything was very consensual. So we did post ourselves and held ourselves to account to where the money was going and how this was possible. And so we were extremely grateful for the community to respond in such a positive way. And we were able to bring these proceeds from this first art project into our next project, which I'll talk about. So in our second project, we turned our focus towards relationship building, working with lens-based artist Jordan Hahn, who curated a photo book and exhibition funded by those first funds, and also a grant from the Edmonton Heritage Council. In late 2022, we invited 10 folks that have connections to Chinatown to work with us, and gave them disposable cameras to explore the untouchable aspects of our comforting yet complicated Chinatown. Our hope was to make safe spaces for intersectional perspectives and intercultural solidarity for folks who identified from being a Chinatown, from anywhere from being a Chinatown auntie, arts and cultural organizers, to outreach worker and Indigenous artists. We gathered in and toured Chinatown spaces, learned about harm reduction, and shared dim sum together. So it's just, I mean, those things that we don't usually talk about in terms of like the merchandise you purchase. Yeah, hopefully they kind of come through, because they were just such beautiful times for us. So here's a social media teaser that Jordan created for the launch. And so I'll just show it really quickly. It's just a few seconds. Hopefully this works. Did that work? All right. Our launch in May was beautiful, and I felt like we were able to articulate in our exhibition and panel discussion with the contributors a sense of inclusivity that we all yearn for in our Chinatown. Oh, oops, sorry. Okay. And the collective photography and merchandise produced invited people to access different lenses to cultural stories and perspectives we may have never experienced, but also it was very familiar and comforting spaces and artifacts that are important to celebrate. So I'm just gonna flip through some of these prints that we have. And you can see I am here at the forum, and Ja has been very supportive of us also fundraising here in Montreal. Um, Here's one from Kyla Pascal. Hi, Edmonton people. Hope you're watching. This is Lee Rain Lux's work. And so what's been exciting for me is to share this work with community members, and even having it here again in Montreal. You know, I've been having these amazing discussions, and it's resonating with people that don't necessarily have a connection with Edmonton. And yeah, it just prompts like a lot of important questions, like whose Chinatown are we talking about? How can art play a role in cultural and economic revitalization? And what does intercultural solidarities in Chinatown on Indigenous lands look like? And so, yeah, thank you everyone for having me, and I hope you enjoyed. Can't wait for our discussions. Sorry.
Thank you, Shawn. That was great. I'm hearing these themes of, as you sort of put it, like art playing a role in cultural and economic revitalization. So really interested to dig into that after our next couple speakers. So our next speaker is Keisha St. Louis-Mcburnie, and she is a planner, a researcher, and writer practicing in Toronto. Keisha sits on the board of directors of Black Urbanism Toronto, a nonprofit organization engaging Black communities and businesses to protect, preserve, promote historically Black spaces through cultural, economic, and social development. So we've gone from New York, a little bit of our tour of Alberta, major cities, and now we're moving to Toronto. Thanks, Keisha, whenever you're ready.
Let me know if you can see this. Beautiful. All right, thanks, folks. Thanks so much for having me this morning. My name is Keisha, and I'm a planner, researcher, and writer based here in Toronto. I'm also calling in from Toronto today, which is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Black Urbanism Toronto is a nonprofit organization that engages Black communities and businesses to protect, preserve, and promote historically Black spaces here in Toronto through cultural, economic, and social development. Over the last few years, our focus has been on engaging Black businesses and residents based in Toronto's Little Jamaica community, specifically to advance cultural preservation and anti-displacement measures in the face of new transit-oriented development pressures. So today I'm here to offer another solidaristic perspective to those organizing in Chinatowns across Turtle Island. So for those who are unfamiliar with Toronto's Little Jamaica, it is located in the northwest part of the city, primarily centered along a major street called Eglinton Avenue West, between Queel Street and Marley Avenue. Little Jamaica is a community with a rich cultural history dating back to the 1970s and 80s, when thousands of immigrants from Jamaica and other islands in the Caribbean immigrated to the area. Early residents also contributing to Toronto's Caribbean demographics included women who came to Canada under the West Indian domestic scheme as domestic workers between 1955 and 1967. Fundamentally, Little Jamaica has made significant cultural, economic, and social contributions to the city of Toronto through music, food, and other things such as entrepreneurship. For example, early recording studios and shops in Little Jamaica played an instrumental role in the globalization of reggae music, second only to Kingston, Jamaica. Some of the neighborhood's most iconic entrepreneurs, such as Randy's Takeout, Monica's Cosmetic Supplies, and Wisdom's Barbershop, have been operating in the neighborhood for over 50 years. Beyond the smoke of sidewalk barbecue, Little Jamaica has also been a place of social solidarity for Black Canadians who felt safe here to express the social frustrations in the events of events such as Black Lives Matter. And today, Little Jamaica remains a critical diaspora hub for Toronto's Black community, but is really facing new devastating challenges that we're trying to work through. So in 2011, Little Jamaica became the site of ongoing construction for the Eglinton Crosstown Light Rail Transit Line, which as of 2 days ago actually has no end construction date due to very severe project mismanagement. For the past 12 years, small businesses have faced displacement pressures due to transit-oriented development, rising commercial rents, and real estate speculation, putting their continued survival at risk. These pressures were further exacerbated by the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic as a result of our citywide lockdown and non-essential business closures. Building upon these factors, the land use planning policies that have been established by our provincial and municipal governments have catalyzed gentrification in the area by directing growth and development here without consideration for community context. So in fact, the previous planning study that was undertaken for the area back in 2014, which is called Eglinton Connects, has not a single mention of the presence of Little Jamaica in the 117-page document. So over 140 establishments really have been lost in the past 10 years due to these factors. Through Black Urbanism Toronto, we've been organizing businesses and residents in Little Jamaica to understand their needs and the challenges they face as a result of ongoing neighborhood change. In 2020, we first launched the Rebuild Eglinton West GoFundMe campaign, which raised over $45,000 to redistribute small micro grants to businesses because there's been absolutely zero financial compensation provided to businesses who've been adversely affected by the construction by any level of government. That same year, we continued to organize residents through the Black Business Conversations community planning process, where we've mapped out the state of the avenue, trying to understand the state of Black ownership in the community, where there are culturally significant sites among other interests, and also to identify early actions for advocacy with our community and government partners. Also in 2021, we partnered with the University of Toronto to dig a little deeper through our placekeeping and Little Jamaica study to identify longer-term community economic development and cultural preservation solutions, including tools that are often used in other cities, such as legacy businesses, cultural tourism initiatives, first right of refusal for Black-owned businesses when new development comes, as well as the role of community land trusts and other forms of community ownership. Fundamentally, in Ontario, the current tools for heritage protection do not address underlying wealth and income inequities that face Black-owned businesses here in Little Jamaica. This includes the fact that overwhelmingly the majority of commercial spaces are not owned and are leased out, which creates a lot of heightened precarity for entrepreneurs and artists along the avenue. Also, our local heritage policies have only the capacity to protect for built form and delegitimize things such as intangible heritage, so the cool and creative things that really happen within the buildings. They also prioritize the architectural interests of typically whiter and wealthier neighborhoods that are well organized and have the resources to advocate to government for their needs. And so the map that you're looking at on the screen right now just shows the relationship between the proportion of Black people in census dissemination areas that are close to Little Jamaica, which is highlighted by that yellow box in the northwest, in contrast to all of the little black dots, which are demonstrated as designated heritage properties, which of course are clustered in places like Rosedale and Yorkville, which again are whiter and wealthier parts of Toronto. So really the tools of cultural heritage preservation that exist today are not serving our community. And in fact, there has actually been a lot of public hesitancy from levels of government to think creatively about how these tools could be adapted to meet our needs. And so in the absence of this, Black Urbanism Toronto, residents and business owners in Little Jamaica and our community partners have been working to co-create a new collective vision for the future of the community. Early wins have included the installation of Reggae Lane, which is a beautiful mural that was designed by Black visual artists to support expression of community identity, as well as support public space activation. We've also been working to reclaim public spaces to enable the creation of Toronto's first Afro-Caribbean farmers market, which today is using an underutilized parking lot, to advance community food sovereignty. Also creating more accessible opportunities for businesses to have startup ideas, given that there are barriers to formally establish and incorporate businesses. We've also been partnering with other organizations to also do community tours of Little Jamaica through organizations such as Heritage Toronto, just making sure that there are places to document and preserve a community history that is not written down formally and is often passed down through storytelling, and often happens in the spaces that are being displayed. So happening in the barbershops as people are getting their hair cut, or in the beauty salons as they're getting their hair done. Also, at the same time, the City of Toronto is returning its attention to Little Jamaica through formal planning efforts. And there have been recent directions to create Little Jamaica's first cultural district plan to identify and actually document the neighborhood's history, as well as identify early opportunities for city investment. Through Black Urbanism Toronto, we continue to be concerned about impacts of gentrification and displacement, and are now focusing our attention on exploring the feasibility of incorporating Toronto's first Black-led community land trust for Little Jamaica, as well as incorporating alternative ideas for community ownership. And so through partnership and collaboration, we've been holding tons of workshops to kind of pull some ideas together about policy, types of physical space and needs, the types of space activation we love to see, and also, how this work interfaces with development, which we know is to come. There's really no incentive right now for the City of Toronto to stop new development to happen in the area. People are door knocking and are consolidating lots to enable new high density development in the area, because it's in close proximity, not just to the LRT line, but also subway stations. And so a part of our conversations and strategies have also been, how do we acquire spaces that come through new development to make sure that artists and entrepreneurs have more accessible opportunities to remain in place in the community. So I'm happy to dig into the types of initiatives that we're exploring through this work, but I think there are lots of connections through, what Chinatowns across North America are doing and the types of issues we're exploring and initiatives we're exploring here in Little Jamaica. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keisha. I think all of us can hear and see the similarities in our communities. We heard a lot yesterday in terms of Chinatowns across, as well as in New York and in Park Extension here in Montreal, which is a traditionally South Asian immigrant neighborhood. So thank you so much for bringing this perspective as well. And we know we're not alone. Last speaker, we have one more. Howard Tam is going to be presenting. I think he has some slides as well. So Howard is a strategic designer with a background in urban planning. He's the CEO of Think Fresh Group, a consultancy company that has worked on commemoration and revitalization projects across the GTA, including in Chinatown. So whenever you're ready, Howard, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So yeah, I'm gonna figure out how to do a screen share as well. Take a PowerPoint. Okay, let's see if we can make this work. Can everyone see my slides? Is that working out for everyone? Awesome, getting the thumbs up, which makes me happy. Okay, so I'm going to put a little timer on as well. Hi, everyone. So my name is Howard. I am a planner by trade, by education, and also a strategic designer. So that's a lot of work around sort of the strategy behind the implementation of projects, and also the strategy around sort of community and local area development. And so I want to talk a little bit today about this idea of cultural storytelling and the value of it. Literally, this to say that that place is always more than what we see, and how we think about what we actually see in spaces that don't often look like they have anything interesting to offer, but really actually do, because there's humans there, and ultimately humans are what makes spaces interesting. So I come at this very much from a suburban perspective. I live in a place called Scarborough, which is a suburb of Toronto, full of seemingly boring looking strip plazas like this. Generally speaking, these malls were designed, and most of suburbia, I would say, was designed in this idea of the most practical way possible, a space really to facilitate, transactions, and not really tell a story. And these spaces are just very functional in that sense. In many respects, it's peak capitalism, really. And it's really where capitalism intersects with urban planning and development and creates spaces that look like this. But really behind the scenes here, there are beautiful stories. And these are actually very human stories and are actually what makes economic development as a thing, right? Jump from being some good theories and ideas to being actually good community and being actually good prosperity, which is really what we're looking for, not just the numbers of like transactions that happened last month, right? And so the reality is that these are actually also our community spaces in the suburbs. We actually really have nothing else in many respects. Like this is where people go hang out, right? Like think of the local Tim Hortons in your local suburb, right? Like that actually functions as a community center in many times over. And so part of this work, I'll just give you sort of this piece of example is we started doing this when there was actually this shopping mall in my neighborhood. I grew up with this mall. It's called the Dragon Center. It's actually North America's first indoor Chinese shopping mall. It's situated in Scarborough. It was built in 1984. And I remember going to it back in its heyday when it was bustling and lots of people. Like you couldn't find a parking spot in this parking lot that you see, which is now mostly empty. And they were planning to redevelop this mall into a condo. And when I first approached the planner on the file at the city of Toronto, and I asked him, "Do you recognize the history and the heritage of this building?" He had no clue. I sent him a bunch of articles about it, and he was just like, "Oh, that's interesting. Maybe we'll put up a plaque." And it was at that point I realized, wow, like there's so much of this like storytelling and heritage that we're not actually doing, and especially in the suburbs, right? Where again, buildings just to most people look pretty boring. And so with the help of some friends and colleagues and organizers, we actually put together a commemoration ceremony for this mall. And we actually invited the community to come out, and over 100 people showed up to actually share stories about their experience with this shopping mall and actually the history that's actually behind it. We compiled this really beautiful history of the mall, like the timeline, right? We had these story sharing circles. We actually had people contribute stories ahead of time and during the actual event, right? To really capture some of this like energy and showcase again what's really happening here in the neighborhood and really what's happening with this particular mall. And it was actually really beautiful because it actually allowed the community to come together that otherwise is very disconnected, right? Often in the suburbs, to be able to talk about this. And what was really cool was the intergenerational aspect of this, where often you'd see a lot of second gens kind of coming out and dragging their parents along, and the parents being like, "Well, what is this? Like, I just came here to buy groceries. What's so important about this space?" And it's like, "Mom, I grew up with this mall. Like, this is the place I used to hang out in as a kid. This is where I'd skip school to go and like, get candy. Like this is it, right? These are our lives, right? And these are the stories that we have to be saving. And so this is actually what's really important about it is being able to facilitate that and talk about it. I'll also talk a little bit about the food tours that we've been doing. So I run a sort of small business called Eat More Scarborough. So Scarborough, just as a quick context, very underinvested and neglected community for a long time. Generally has a bad reputation in the city of Toronto for a very long time. But we also have some of the best food in the city, and a lot of it is because of this neglect and disinvestment. It's created a lot of very affordable spaces actually for a lot of new entrepreneurs, newcomers especially, to settle, start their businesses, right, and really talk about and really showcase the food that they're really good at cooking. And so we have some of the best restaurants. And so we were seeing that as a thing, and we wanted to really promote that and actually support this larger idea of like, let's tell better stories about Scarborough. And so we started Eat More Scarborough as a way to do that. And we've been taking tour groups, large and small, all over, from all over, to talk about and eat some of our amazing food, as you can see in some of these pictures. From Princess Pastries to Aleppo Kebab and like some of the most beautiful stories ever. And that really is also what's important is the stories of the entrepreneurs who are actually doing this work. That's actually what makes it really interesting because many of these joints are takeout only or like quick serve, right? There isn't a lot of, experience, like they're not going to win awards for experience, but they do win awards for like the quality of the food and the consistency of how good that food actually is. And the beauty of it also is the human story that actually comes out of it, being, entrepreneurs from around the world. Just to give you an example of that, I want to introduce you very quickly to Sumi Fernando, who Montreal people are going to hate me for telling this story, but you're going to remember it. I can guarantee you, he actually has a Montreal smoked meat restaurant in Toronto that he actually started about 6 years ago, and he actually now has, and so he recently actually won a Michelin award. He actually has a Bib Gourmand, and he's actually recognized now as having some of the best smoked meat in Toronto. And I am going to actually venture to say in the world, because he actually also is an alumnus of Schwartz. He actually worked at Schwartz's. He had never actually had smoked meat in his entire life. He comes from Sri Lanka. He comes to Canada, lands in Montreal, works at Schwartz's, gets a job there, learns how to make smoked meat, and then he's like, you know what? I'm going to open my own shop. So he moved to Toronto, and he moved to the suburbs, like Scarborough. And I was like, why did you open here? He's like, oh, a lot of my customers that came to Schwartz's from Toronto were from Scarborough. That's why I ended up opening my restaurant here. And the other part of it is that he is now basically a Sri Lankan man who serves a halal version of what was traditionally a Jewish kosher dish to mostly Asian customers in Scarborough, which is like probably the most Scarborough diverse story that you could possibly ever imagine. But this is actually what's happening now in Scarborough, is this level of quality of food. And again, like, these are the stories I think that really capture people's imagination and make you want to actually go back to a business like this, right? To be like, I want to continue to support this because it's actually a really great story of survival and, you know, coming to Canada and being part of something that's actually a very Canadian tradition. And one last thing I'll mention is that we're doing in my planning practice, we are also doing a project on Chinatown in Toronto. We are consulting with the community about the future of Chinatown right now. We've been hired as a consulting group, and I know Rick was mentioning this on the first panel on Thursday, but just to also say that we're trying to embed this idea also of storytelling and cultural storytelling in the work we're doing. We produce these really like cute postcards with like streetcars and you know, strung them up on lines. And I remember actually when we did this event actually a few weeks ago at the Chinatown Festival, people were coming up to us and being like, is this like an art project? And I was like, no, this is actually a planning consultation. And it was just really neat to be able to say that, like, this level of storytelling, we want to be able to tell it and to tell the story of Chinatown so that it actually can become something that people really truly respect. And I'm getting the croissant, so I know that I am running out of time, but I can talk more about this. Feel free to ask me any questions. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that the croissant, this is, I think, an Ontario croissant. So there you go, to continue your story. Thank you so much, Howard. And thank you to all the speakers. This has been, I've been taking some furious notes, and I'm going to slightly alter our first question. So I think all of you, our first question is about how do we integrate cultural development and economic objectives. And I think all of you have actually talked about this, though, like, you know, expanding beyond transactions. I think that was from Howard, but I also heard it from Mei. But, you know, so it's clear that all of you are doing these projects, whether they're art projects or retail projects, that are going beyond that mere transaction. And so I guess coming off a theme that I heard yesterday, or some of the content yesterday, how do we do this integration of cultural development and economic and melding those economic objectives in a way that's, you know, like, I think Alice, like, you talked about the thousands of volunteer hours, and over here in Montreal we're also giving a lot of volunteer hours. And so I guess not necessarily institutionalize it, but, like, I guess kind of like, how do we do this? How do we make this part of the fabric of our Chinatowns, or of, you know, our little Jamaicas, of these communities that need that work, so that, you know, like, even in terms of our building coalitions, how we talked about or how it was talked about, you know, making sure that people are at the table, etc. So I'm going to throw that out there. So, like, in thinking about how we integrate cultural development and economic objectives, but, you know, how do we do this in a more structured way that we're not burning ourselves out? I'm happy. I see Shawn's hand, and then maybe folks can just put up their hand, and we'll go from.
Maybe I'll start with, like, maybe the most boring part of it, but I think it's so important, is the way that things are administrated. I think often we think of an end product, and there's a lot of, like, in between or background work that ends up, you know, like certain gaps may, or certain things come up that challenge the project, and there isn't like any agreement, or there's no collective decision making or in place. And so I think that it's super important for any organizers out there to really think through all the different administrative challenges or surprises that could arise, and to come to an agreement before things really start, because those are the things that we can somewhat have some sort of control on, so that it doesn't create too much tension between the group, and understanding that, yeah, of course, we're all coming in this work with a lot of passion and a lot of heart. And so you know people and things and situations will clash. And so part of like the operation of it is about like kind of predicting where things can kind of come at surprises. So yeah, I think that it's like kind of not talked about enough in terms of operation. And it definitely is something, if you do a little more preparation and you just think about collective agreements on how we can do this work in a safe way, and just ensure that there's a lot of consensual ways to ensure that the community is engaged and consenting, that will go a long way to making your project work out.
Go ahead, Howard. Thank you, Shawn.
Thank you, Shawn. And I wanted to say I think to add to that, and also to add to the themes I think that this panel has been speaking a lot about, is about like honoring and supporting your storytellers, your story keepers, and your story makers. And and supporting them, right? And finding ways to really support them. And I'll just give one example of that. So in Toronto, through the work we've been doing with our food tours, like Eat More Scarborough, culinary tourism is still not really a thing in Toronto. When the city, for example, talks about like food, they're excited about the Michelin guide that they just brought to town. They're excited about all the fancy 5-star restaurants that are downtown. But I keep telling them, I'm like, you have to do more culinary tourism. And really what culinary tourism is actually storytelling, right? Like we're, as food tour guides, we're telling stories about restaurants and about the businesses that's actually happening there and the food that's happening there to share with the rest of the world, so people get excited about it and want to come back. And there's like very little support for that. And I keep pushing the city on it, but like, they're just not really listening, or they just don't seem to care, right? And so that's something that I think we can actually do a lot more work on, is finding ways to support this story creation, story keeping, and story sharing in all different aspects too, from the heritage perspective, right? From the tourism perspective, from the like just telling stories about your neighborhood, so that more people are aware of actually what's happening on the ground right now. And one other thing I'll say is that like this piece is also very strategic in a way, because I feel that the more people that know about the story of a place, the more likely that if and when development finally shows up, right, to try and steal your space from you, the more people will actually be at least willing to, the more likelihood there will be people that are willing to stand up for that, because they've heard the story and they're actually really excited about it now.
Thanks, Howard. Alice, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. And I think in our experience, building trust is a huge part of it. Like what we're doing is basically change management, and it takes years. Like you can see, we've been doing it for 7 years, and we're still just like starting to get the associations and kind of like the patriarchal leadership that's in the community to start like give us opportunities, and to reach out to us and to kind of respect our opinions as well. I think in the beginning it was kind of, oftentimes people would get frustrated, especially the younger generation, with elders in the neighborhood who would be like, well, this is how we do stuff, or we're not interested. And it really just took a lot of persistence and like showing up to everything. And it takes a lot of time and acknowledging that that is a privilege that not everybody has. But I don't think that we would be able to do the things that we're doing today if it wasn't for just like a lot of honesty and trust with the people, and showing up, and just like not having a timeline and not trying to rush everything. I know through this work, like we're doing a lot of education as well. Like there's a big dichotomy kind of between the older generation and their understanding of like anti-racism, colonization, capitalism, all that stuff. And it's like, it's sometimes super awkward to have these conversations. It can be very off-putting. And sometimes like people are just like, I'm not ready to have the emotional labor to deal with this or to educate an entire like age group of people on why this matters and why we have to be like allies and stuff like that. So it can be exhausting. But what we've been doing with like the events and the activities is like it to show people that it's not always political, even though it's really important. Like what's more important is kind of those stories and like helping build a more sense of place within the neighborhood.
I think Keisha. Okay, let's go to Keisha, then we'll go to Mei. Keisha, please.
Yeah, just on what Alice was saying, I think we've had a very similar experience in Little Jamaica. Like in the absence of government attention for several years, it's been Black urbanism Toronto doing literal door knocking for 2 years just to meet folks in the community, understand who the families are, why they're there, what challenges they're facing before even going through a community planning process. Because I think what folks were concerned about was because there was a lack of attention from government, they were also weary of why suddenly this community organization was coming and what they could offer them in terms of organizing support. And so for a long time, they spent just having community-based conversations, which then grew into a community planning process to then begin to map out the state of the avenue. And I think another thing that we're struggling with is also to Alice's point is when we're talking about community wealth building, it's a very foreign idea in the sense that we're talking about it often today in urban planning or community economic development, in that folks don't know what a land trust is or why that would serve their needs. Like folks who don't already have ownership are focused on making rent, let alone what this new form of collective ownership could mean or would look like, even legally on paper, and like why they should be invested in that as an idea, let alone financially. And so it's been a lot of trying to just have basic conversations around what values we already hold today as a community. A lot of it is already collective through mutual aid, through programs like SUSU, where we have collective loan programs to redistribute money, and how, we're beginning to tie the relationship between culturally appropriate programs with what are Western programs, but are what Western programs are doing in the context of capitalism. And so we've been having lots of just basic conversations about what the connections are values-wise. And the community is not ready yet. So we've been having this conversation about a land trust for the last 3 years, and we're still struggling with it because this isn't something we want to impose upon the neighborhood. We want it to feel organic and appropriate. And so, that's still to be determined. There may be other models that are of interest to us, but it's been a really interesting sets of conversations, but also a struggle to figure out what feels like the right first move.
Thanks, Keisha. Mei, please.
Yeah, I really agree with what everyone has already mentioned. I think at the WOW project and at WOW, what we're thinking a lot about is cultural narrative building and shifting, and how we can use the power of art and culture to challenge and resist against the portrayals of Chinatown and Chinatown's creative culture as mere relics of the past, viewed through this voyeuristic and exotic and orientalist lens. And I think if we're looking at that as like the sustainability of pushing our work and pushing Chinatown to its future, then it's really important that we continue to keep that as a bigger picture umbrella kind of goal in each smaller, disruption or iteration of programming that we put out, that we're moving towards, shifting the outside gaze and the outside viewpoint of Chinatown so we can actually go deeper in the cultural and economic development work that we do.
Thank you. So it leads us actually to our next question. So a lot of you have spoken about this, like a city narrative or the media narrative or the exoticization. And I guess, so with this, the bigger, more prevalent narrative, whether or not it's from the city media or just, other residents who aren't in Chinatown as a place to visit, consume, or tourist attraction, or, to buy cheap goods, or what we talked about yesterday, where, a lot of our Chinatowns are suffering from a lot of closed businesses, unhoused folks in the neighborhood, crime, etc. And so how do we balance that narrative, or how do we, as we understand how it impacts our small businesses, how can we best work within that narrative that is there already to, as you said, like this is a change management thing, but how do we do that? How do we do that slowly with those partners? And still reap the benefits of, the fact that they have more resources, et cetera.
My suggestion is not to center them. Like, I don't think that it's important for groups that have amazing stories to worry about pandering to like the mainstream. I think our community is strong, and I think and social media has shown us time and time again that folks that can reach out. And I know that in Scarborough there's that one restaurant where the daughter just took it to social media, and they now have like a ridiculous following, and their entire operation has transformed because the community heard it from the people that make it directly. And so I think to if we're talking about like spreading the word, like how, if you are a storyteller or someone that has some sort of skill in doing marketing, if you care about Chinatown, like, is that something that you may want to lend a hand for, like your favorite restaurant? You know what I mean? So there's all sorts of tactics where we're not relying on the mainstream media to drive attention and care to the cultural organizations and stuff like that. And often it's, for mainstream media, it's because it's hard to distill these nuanced things in our community. And so even when I've gone on like media to talk about Chinatown, I feel very uncomfortable because the way that they distill these questions are so still like what we're talking about, this voyeuristic. It's very extractive, and at the end of the day, I'm not even sure what they're cutting out to show the public. And so the best way to do it is to take back that voice and be around people that you feel comfortable with, and produce within the community.
Go, Alice. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. Yeah, to follow that point, I agree. Like when we first started doing the advocacy in Chinatown, like they have an agenda of the story that they want to create. And I found that a lot of times like betrayed by the media when I realized, oh shit, they don't just like report on stuff that you say, they kind of twist it. Like I was so naive. But now I think having boundaries with reporters and just being like certain reporters we just won't even talk to because we know that their goal is to incite like essentially violence between like marginalized groups. One big thing that happened in Calgary Chinatown is like we had a Black artist create a BLM mural that was for one of our buildings. It was, I guess, always meant to be temporary because there was a development next door that would basically cover that mural. But Rebel News Media took hold of it and then turned it into this like, you're jamming BLM down the throats of Chinese community. A lot of the Chinese people who don't understand like, it's not that they don't understand, but that didn't have enough information about like what was happening. It came back down to like the importance of community consultation, because once they realized what it was about, once they realized like the Black and Chinese history and the allyship that had occurred for like centuries prior to this mural coming up, they realized why it is important. And explaining, one thing that was really important in explaining was like, if you want people to respect and have Chinese art around the city, not just during Chinese New Year and not to be like token about it, like you have to accept art of different cultures in your neighborhood as well, and businesses from different cultures as well. And it's all about respect more than it is like fitting within a box. And even yesterday I mentioned that I was walking around Chinatown here, and there was like a Mid-Autumn festival, and like the cops were there, like just like doing like a community event. And I was like, that seems so dangerous to me. And it seems so calculated and wrong. And yet like so many people still like I would say a majority of the population in Chinatowns like are still like cops good, because it protects us. And it also like lends itself to like colonialism and like model minority and proximity to whiteness and all that stuff. And so there's a lot, like there's literally like a century of like this type of oppressive tactics like at play that we're slowly trying to like educate people out of. But even when the community is like, hey, we need more police and we just like don't participate. Like we just basically we keep doing what we're doing. And just like any business anywhere in the city of Calgary right now, like homelessness and crime and harm reduction, like it's at top of mind for so many people. And so I think a lot of the times the community will shame Chinatown, especially because it's an easy, homogeneous kind of target to be like, they all like don't understand harm reduction and stuff like that. And it's like, well, actually, it's like a lot of businesses around the city are dealing with this and trying to learn and trying to understand. And so, yeah, it's complicated.
Thanks, Alice. Keisha, please.
Yeah, it's also making me think a little bit about the role of media in Little Jamaica, in that a lot of the articles are very negative, right? It's like Little Jamaica is dying, which fuels speculation. Like as soon as the media is picking up on the fact that, you know, folks are leaving, developers are reading those articles and are thinking prime opportunity for investment. And there isn't right now enough counter media or storytelling coming out of Little Jamaica in the same way maybe as some of Howard's work in Scarborough is, to do a more effective job of countering that. And I think that it's also reflective of how, like, we did some work in reviewing real estate postings and like reviewing how they were describing the commercial spaces, like they were derelict, you know, they were empty, abandoned. They were using place names that weren't actually even related to Little Jamaica, but they were in Little Jamaica. And there wasn't a lot of critique of how folks were picking up on media narratives of the neighborhood to fuel reinvestment. And so I think certainly through some of the upcoming Little Jamaica work, we can certainly do a better job of thinking about counter narrative and community storytelling as practices to make sure that those narratives that are community based from the bottom up are more emboldened than they are currently today.
Howard, please. Thanks, Keisha.
I'll add to this by saying that on the flip side of that, I mean, I know that Keisha, you're saying that you know, maybe the narrative about Scarborough is changing a little bit, but it kind of has like, it's a double-edged sword because, like, again, ultimately, media narratives and mass narratives want to try to fit you into a particular kind of narrative, right? And so like we experience this problem sometimes of like, okay, we've been neglected and underinvested in for a long time. People used to say Scarborough was like the, you know, the ghetto, et cetera, things like that, right? And then as Scarborough starts to change and has like really good restaurants, some of those restaurants are now co-opted into Toronto, right? And like you see this a lot in like, you know, publications like Blog TO and stuff like that. We actually had a really beautiful, actually, community story of community actually trying to save one of our local legacy restaurants, right? The Real McCoy. It's a burger restaurant that, a burger and pizza restaurant, always had affordable food, was part of the neighborhood, right, in Scarborough. And for many years, it served many people. Lots of like, you know, young kids, again, skip school, go there, eat their pizza, right? Get some cheap burgers and fries, right? People love the place. And unfortunately, it was, you know, condoed out. The owner of the plaza sold it to a condo and they had to move out as of late last year. And but what happened was actually a community member actually stepped in at the very last minute. Somebody who actually grew up with this restaurant, somebody who loved the food, somebody who really loved the owner, George Mahal, and said, "I want to help you." Actually, and he had actually gone. This community member, actually gone on and become quite successful in business. So he actually had a bit of money, and so he said, "I want to invest in your business so that you can actually retire the way you want to retire and not have to be retired because of this stupid condo coming in." And so they actually bought a new unit not too far away, and they reopened the restaurant just about a month ago, and it was like a blazing success. Like, I mean, so many people came out to the opening. It was like, you know, covered in the media, things like that, right? But again, you see this like idea of like, oh, famed Toronto burger joint, you know, is going to reopen and it's going to be cool and all of that. But I was like, no, this is actually a community story. Why are we not sharing the community side of this, right? Of a community member stepping up to actually invest in a legacy business that he actually cared about. And why are we actually still also calling this Toronto? This is Scarborough, guys. Like, show up for us, really. So there is that element too of like of some of that now happening, I'm seeing. And something also I think that we also have to watch out for and continue to counter that narrative as well of like what this place is and who these people are, and who's in our community.
Mei, please. Thank you, Howard.
Yeah, I really resonate with what Keisha mentioned about the predominant narrative around Chinatown and the usage of language like dying or saving, and very much reinforcing the savior narrative around the neighborhood and what that does and how that impacts not only small businesses but residents. All of the fights we're resisting against right now. Recently, there was a New York Times article that came out uplifting the next generation of Asian Americans in Chinatown. And I think it really simplified and diluted the complexities of what is going on in Manhattan's Chinatown right now. And it continued to allow this prevailing savior narrative to dominate. And I think we have to understand what players and systems are at play to reinforce this. Having one savior or one collective, people or person to save a neighborhood is not realistic. And how can we complicate that in our storytelling and narrative building and shifting? I think it's important that we, if there are media or articles or things that come out that we don't agree with, that we make sure that we put out responses to things like that, because that's how we can complicate things and build complexity around the things that are going on. Like we're all mentioning Chinatown, and our neighborhoods are very multifaceted. There are different voices, and yeah, I think I mean I myself struggle with, like, should we play into and participate in media if we do have conflicting feelings about it? And there is, like, this other part of the argument where it is a large platform, like we can share what's going on, but it's like a both and situation where we can play into it and participate, but there needs to be also an additional conversation and dialogue that happens outside of just media in general.
Thank you. I think
Oh,
so
can I
just
add something? Oh,
sure, Shawn, please.
yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, May shared about how we need to see mass media as a tool, right? And so how are we prepped to make this tool work for us, right? And so I think what we're hearing is that if the narrative is not, you know, like true and authentic to what we've tried to share, then part of it is just we have not prepared ourselves to use this tool in a way that is effective for what we're trying to drive, right? And so yeah, I completely agree. Like there still is a place for mass media, especially when it comes to folks that may not be like internally in the community to have awareness. And so it still is in a very effective way to doing it, but I think you just have to be very cautious of like, what is your message? Like if it is to just drive people down to like buy things, for example, that's an easy story to distill, right? And so that's your messaging, right? But I feel like it's when we start talking about you know saving things, or this very colonial like narrative of like dying and needing help from others. That's where the nuance and complexity really start to like unravel, and people lose sense and control of like whose community is this now, right?
Thank you. Yeah, I think she put in a question, and I think this is addressing it, and sort of like, how do we make sure that our projects and the work that you're doing is not harmful or just about consumption, and how do we, and I think what you guys are pulling out is like that storytelling and making sure that it's authentic and making sure that it is telling that complex story that we have. So we have a few minutes left, and I want to take a question from the chat. And this is, I'll be guilty, is that this is very much, I mean, I'm sure it's also the situation in everyone else's city, but something we're dealing with here in Montreal. So how do we strike a balance between acknowledging new businesses from outside the community? So this is something Alice spoke about, but also preventing the block from being overrun by these non-Chinese or non-Black businesses, or and so I just wanted to hear sort of like last reflections, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. Anyone have thoughts?
Was the question to prevent?
No, so like a
Okay,
few,
because that's
so
a strong word. I mean, yeah, I don't think it's about preventing anything. I think it's about like folks that are interested in coming to Chinatown, like regardless of like setting up a business, like to be very aware of like what your like who your this community is, right? Like it's not it's not hard to Google what's going on in Chinatown and to just be a little more socially conscious about like the sensitivities around every Chinatown's needs, right? And so I think it's almost just like a baseline or a basic to like be familiar with like how you enter a cultural space. And like that should be it's a mass narrative. Like what like
Mhm.
you can't just like come in thinking that because you have money that you don't need to interact with the people around you. That's not even a good sustainable business model. Like
yeah, Alice, please.
We've recently, because of kind of the popularity of Chinatowns and even our building that's being like revitalized and people like love how it looks, like we're being super picky about which tenant we put in because we do want somebody to like, and we have the ability to be picky about it because we own the building. But we had somebody who came by and was just like, how much do you want for it? And we are like, not for sale, Chinatown's not for sale. And they're like, yeah, but everybody has a number. Like it was so egregious and like just rude. And this person was Chinese too, just from like a different part, like not Chinese diaspora, like generations. Like, so I find that oftentimes the bigger kind of pain point is between like people who are from like mainland, new here, investing, like really wanting to do like high towers, like like seeing the value in like gentrification and thinking that it's like, well, I can, if like everybody has a price and I can buy it and I'm going to turn it into this like giant metropolis, basically like Queens, Chinatown, or whatever, right? And it really offends the people in the neighborhood because I think what has been Chinatown's saving grace, honestly, to prevent at least Calgary Chinatown is so many of like 75% of the buildings are owned by nonprofit family associations. And so they're lucky that they've paid off their mortgage, they have their expenses, and typically they have a rent paying tenant on the main floor. But if it goes empty, like they have a little bit of time, like they're not as leveraged as like a private owner would be who's like just getting a new mortgage and like really needing to have that cash flow. And trying to explain to people like, hey, if they like things take time and you can't like force anything down people's throat. And some parts of Chinatown are just not for sale. Like that's it. But I think the education aspect is like super important. And for us, like we have a pretty big profile in Calgary. And so people like look to us and like talk to us about how, like they ask us questions and we encourage them to, like, if they want to come into Chinatown, like whether as an artist or a business owner or whatever, just providing them with like consistent and like good like information has been really useful.
Thank you. I'm on mute. No, I'm not. Hello. Okay. Are there any last words from Howard, Keisha, or Mei on this question?
I have a brief word, which is just to say, like change is constant. And I think for our little Jamaica, it's hard to think only about preservation. And I think we do have to, for us at least, accept some degree of change. And so for us, we're thinking about how do we shape that change? And there are lots of other Black entrepreneurs who are not of Afro-Caribbean descent who are looking for some place to locate and be a part of that diaspora. And, for us, we want Little Jamaica to be an open place for other members of the diaspora to invest. And so, we're thinking not just about, how do we make sure that Afro-Caribbean businesses can continue to exist, but also how other folks of the Black diaspora can explore creativity, entrepreneurship, and artistry where we live. So we're not necessarily open for development business, but we're certainly open for other Black-owned business.
Thank you.
My simple one-liner would just be to say, I would hope that there's a way and a process whereby communities or BIAs or whatever the case may be, whoever actually is the steward of the particular neighborhood, right, can actually basically ask a new business the question, why do you want to be here? And B, what do you plan to how do you plan to connect with the community? How do you plan to contribute to this community? And actually get a satisfactory answer. And if you don't get a satisfactory answer, yeah, so there has to be. It would be nice if we can find a way to actually not have those businesses around.
Mei, I'm going to give you the last word if you want to take it.
I have so many feelings about this question. I think it's really complicated, and it's hard to say, to dictate who is welcome to open a business and who isn't. But at the same time, it's what Keisha was saying, and wanting to support, the Chinatown for a lot of folks has been a place of arrival in a lot of ways, of, arriving here from a foreign country, from their homeland, and all of our small businesses here are here because it gave them a chance to build a life and a livelihood. And I think it just goes back to Chinatown now and what is the function or the purpose of our neighborhood for our communities. And yeah, I could talk for an hour about this question, but I'll leave it there. I agree with what everyone has shared. It's complicated, and it really comes down to what is the future that we're all building towards for our ethnic communities, and how can we collectively build towards that together, with small businesses and also cultural development as well.
Thank you so much. All of you have given me so much to think about. My wheels are turning, and I hope everyone else's is too. So I just want to thank you again for this great discussion. I look forward to, I'm going to head down to Chinatown House right away and hopefully meet Alice and Shawn, or meet Shawn again. But thank you, Howard. Thank you, Keisha. Thank you, Mei, Alice, and Shawn for this great discussion. We're going to take a quick break before the next panel. I believe it starts in half an hour. Anyways, this has been great. Thank you oh so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.